Welcome back, Daisy Cakes. Today we're going to review the 1945 Retro Hugo winner, Shadow Over Mars by Leigh Brackett. Why? Because I am Daisy Ex Machina, the drag queen detective who investigates all things speculative in science fiction, fantasy, and horror. This is part of my ongoing series of picking one Retro Hugo nominee year by year in search of finding authors or books that I haven't read before. And for the 1945 Retro Hugos, I picked the winning novel, Leigh Brackett's Shadow Over Mars. Because one, it sounded interesting, and two, I have been wanting to read Leigh Brackett for quite some time. In fact, she was known as the Queen of the Space Opera. Of course, I wanted to know more about Leigh Brackett, so let's get into it. Leigh Brackett was born in 1915 and died in 1978 at the age of 62. She was first published in 1940 with a science fiction short story in the pulp magazine Astounding Science Fiction, and she was quite prolific in the 1940s as a science fiction writer, becoming one of the few prominent women who wrote in the golden age of science fiction. Like most science fiction authors of that time, she mostly wrote for the pulp magazines, which meant she mostly wrote short stories, so sometimes she sold longer works to be serialized, like Shadow Over Mars, which won the Retro Hugo for 1945. She was mentor to Ray Bradbury. She married fellow science fiction author Edmund Hamilton in 1946, where Ray Bradbury was the best man. She and her husband were also good friends with Robert Heinlein. She was the first woman shortlisted for the Hugo for her novel The Long Tomorrow in 1956, and she was one of the first two women ever nominated for a Hugo, the other being C.L. Moore, whose book I reviewed for the last Retro Hugo, Earth's Last Citadel. Leigh Brackett also wrote detective fiction, which caught the attention of Howard Hawks, a big-name Hollywood director who apparently wanted that guy Brackett to help another writer with a screenplay, and that writer was William Faulkner. And that screenplay was The Big Sleep. She went on to write screenplays for some pretty famous movies like Rio Bravo, Atari, and The Long Goodbye. She came back to writing science fiction in the 1970s and then was asked to do one last screenplay. You may have heard of it. The Empire Strikes Back. Yes, Leigh Brackett wrote the first draft of the screenplay for the second Star Wars movie, The Empire Strikes Back, which, in my opinion, was the best of all the Star Wars movies. Unfortunately, she never got beyond the first draft because she passed away from cancer in 1978 before the movie was released. George Lucas later dedicated The Empire Strikes Back to Leigh Brackett. So yeah, Leigh Brackett was kind of a big deal. So what about her writing? I had picked Shadow Over Mars, the winner of the 1945 Retro Hugos, which were awarded in 2020 mostly because of Leigh Brackett. It was first published in 1944 in the pulp science fiction magazine Startling Stories. It was first published as a novel in 1961 and was also published under the alternate title The Nemesis from Terra. It's a very short novel. In fact, I think it may actually be a novella, but that also makes it a pretty quick read. Brackett is known as the Queen of the Space Opera, and this is one of those stories that maybe helped give her that nickname. It is heavily inspired by Edgar Rice Burroughs' John Carter of Mars. At least it was for me. It was definitely that same type of science fiction story, which was called back then planetary romance. And the romance in planetary romance does not necessarily mean love stories like we think of romance novels today, but romance as it used to be used to mean swashbuckling adventure stories. That said, there is an awful lot of rippling muscles, tawny skin, and those types of descriptors. The story is about a man named Rick Urquhart who was not born on Mars, but somehow got caught up in a rebellion on Mars and was told by this woman psychic or prophet that she saw his shadow over Mars. And that woman who told him that then tries to kill him because he's so dangerous. Anyway, Leigh Brackett's Mars here felt, like I said before, inspired by Edgar Rice Burroughs' Barsoom. The planet is dying or in its last days, and there are remnants of once great civilizations, but the native Martians are in decline. One, the black Martians, not to be confused with black-skinned humans, and there are a few prominent dark-skinned humans, but black Martians is kind of unfortunate she used that term. Here are sometimes used as hunting animals. It's kind of weird. But there's this other race of Martians who are winged and short and kind of look like fairies. Mars is overseen by the Company, which is set to take complete control, even though there are factions working against them, mostly native Martian-born humans who have to live under the thumb of the Company. Rick Urquhart is destined to take the Company down, but in order to do so, he kind of has to do some bad things. And this is kind of, much to my surprise, a bit of an anti-hero story. I'm really not quite sure what to make of the main character. Even though the writing style wasn't my favorite, I do recommend this book if you are interested in some of the retro, old-school space opera or planetary romance. It's a very fast read, and I am curious about her other longer works of fiction because during the 1950s, she apparently became more known for a poetic prose in other books set on Mars. But what about you? Are you curious about Leigh Brackett? Have you read her works, or do you want to? Let me know down in the comments. And while you're there, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Next time, I'll be picking a book from the Retro Hugo nominees of 1946, so keep an eye out for that. Until we meet again, may all the books you read be blessed.